for a lot of people in operations right now, and this is really we call it the human factors approach to mobile equipment pedestrian interface. And we're lucky enough to have Heather Cayley, a human factors specialist from WorkSafe BC, who's going to be presenting today. Um, so I think Heather has a long association with WorkSafe BC, but also has been doing a lot of work on this topic throughout the many different industries in BC. So welcome, Kaylee. We're all looking forward to how you can help us out with these issues.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that, Bill and Tammy, working in kind of the background to support me today. I appreciate it, and the opportunity to speak with you all. So yeah, Bill mentioned that I do have a long kind of connection with WorkSafe BC. As of next year, it will be 30 years. So yeah, I've been doing this for quite a while. I have been working in the area of struck bys, which I'm going to talk to you about the long trajectory since 1990. Well, no, maybe more like in the early 2000s, 2004, I believe. So it's been a major focus, and I'm going to be explaining why it's been a major focus for years. And yeah, a little bit about myself. Yeah, Bill said I'm a human factor specialist, and yeah, dealing with ergonomics, like kind of physical ergonomics, which you probably all are somewhat familiar with, as well as human and organizational performance. Called HOP. And I sit in the risk analysis unit. I work with a team of 4 other ergonomists. And you might know Jenny Coleman. I know she's done some work with the BC Forest Safety Council and others. And we actually went to school with and did our master's in Sweden, but a lot of our work actually stemmed from felling trees on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So yeah, we have a long kind of connection with that industry and the BC Forest Safety Council. And yeah, glad to be here today. So what I'm going to do is provide a little bit of an introduction, but I know that Tammy mentioned that she's shared some information with each of the participants already, and it's just links to the WorkSafe BC website for preventing struck bys. As of January, we have developed a few new resources, and we wanted to share those resources with you. Number 2, the website. There's some other links to risk management, as well as a bulletin, which I'll be sharing with you as well today. And it's just providing you some additional resources to help us move in this space. And you'll see where those resources fit in to this risk and this topic generally as we move forward. So I also wanted to just mention about the chat. This is an informal meeting, and we do have 90 minutes. I don't plan to be speaking for that long. We do have some engagement exercises along the way, and I think the best thing that we can do is engage with each other and asking me questions, and I'll answer as best as I can. So if you want to pop some thoughts or comments or ideas into the chat to let me know that you're there, that you know, a thumbs up or some reactions, I would most welcome that. So Tammy's going to handle the chat, and don't worry about interrupting me. Happy to stop and explain a concept or provide an illustration as is needed. So let's get started. So what are we going to do today? First of all, I want to introduce and highlight why struck by incidents are a key risk focus area for WorkSafe BC. It's quite a stubborn risk, as you're going to be finding out, and it's been a journey for us for several years. We'll also be talking about some of the workplace system factors that influence and contribute to these incidents. Some will not be surprising, but I think some might be. And then I'm going to share some principles for effective prevention. And you'll see there that it's principles. I'm not going to be giving you solutions, perhaps, but it's more along the lines of guidelines for effective prevention. I'll also want to work us through some of the practical tools that I mentioned at the outset, as well as a few other ones, like MSI prevention and, you know, other hazards that WorkSafeBC has tools for. You're not required to use them, but they are being used. They are good, but maybe in conjunction with what you're already doing, there's other options as well. So I'll be introducing some of that. And I want to engage and guide you through some practical exercises. And I'm hoping that with that, then you'll get some more familiarity with the topic and ways to move forward. And I kind of just wanted to start by saying, like, when you hear struck by, I'm not sure what pops into your mind, but there's actually 4 types of struck by hazards. And we are almost 1 month out from the national stand down on preventing struck by incidents through NIOSH and CDC. And that's where they focused on falling objects, flying objects, swinging objects, and rolling objects that can produce struck by hazards. But just for clarity, this presentation is going to be discussing rolling hazards. And with that, I'd like to I've introduced myself, introduced the agenda, but I'd like to get to know you a little bit more. I got just a few poll questions, so if you can either give me a thumbs up or maybe tap your answers into the chat, I would super appreciate it. First question is, what's your job title or your primary responsibility? I know sometimes you might wear a certain hat as, on the HR document, then what you do is quite a lot more different than that. So what are some of the roles that we have on the people joining us today? Like, are you a supervisor, production lead? Are you coming in from HR, safety or environment? So we've got health and safety manager. Do we have any other ergonomists or human factor specialists on the call today? Corporate safety, thank you, Jason. Shipping. Okay, anything from HAZOP to project development. Process. Okay, nice. Patrick, regional safety for sawmills. Excellent, thank you. Maintenance or engineering. IT coordinator, excellent. And what about purchasing? I don't see purchasing. Okay, and then I'm ops lead and then senior management, slightly different. Superintendent at Interfor, Daniel, excellent, thank you. Site manager, okay, great. A lot of people who are game changers on the call today, so that's fantastic. What about participation in Joint Health and Safety Committee? Is that a kind of a common thing, or there's other people on your site cooperating with, or not cooperating, but participating in the Joint Health and Safety Committee? So who can put a thumbs up to yes, they participate on the Joint Health and Safety Committee? Site supervisor, thank you, David. Co-chair, oh, okay, great. Coordinator, JOHS, perfect. Okay, so we definitely have some participating and some other management leads, so that's nice to know. Thank you. What about the work that your company's involved in? Does it involve specifically operating vehicles, mobile equipment around workers on foot? If you want to just raise your hand for this one, that might be easiest, or you can pop a yes yes or a Y into the chat. Lori says yeah, so we have a yes, but some say not anymore. I've got a couple of hands. Okay. Anyone? So I've got a Lori saying no. Yes. Okay. All right. So this is going to be really pertinent to, I didn't know if you're going to be overseeing some work, then you'd have to translate this content, which you will have my PDF slides to do that. But if you do need to translate it with working with Bill or others, we have been working with employers, both big and small, on this risk. And so I'm available to help translate the knowledge if there's a need.
Heather, it looks like Trevor Murdoch has a question.
Oh, that's a question. Oh, I thought it was a raised hand.
Oh,
okay,
no,
Trevor.
Sorry, Bill. That was just a yes to the Josh committee.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thanks for catching that. Everyone's quick on the catch, so that's perfect. So what about your work? I was asking about the work of your business, but does your work involve keeping workers on foot safe while near vehicles? Yes or no? Can we get a thumbs up for yes or a thumbs down for no? In terms of your direct responsibility. Yes, always. Yes. No. Okay. Also pedestrian safety leader on site. Okay, nice. Like to hear about that, AJ, pedestrian safety leader. Okay.
Can you please lower hand if if you don't have a question?
Terrific. Okay. So that just helps me to understand a little bit about the audience and who's participating today. So that's really, really helpful. And now I'm going to kind of give us a bit of a preface leading up to where we're going to be going with the topic today. So how many people on the call can you shoot up your hand? Sorry, I know that looks like put up a thumb maybe. Who's familiar with the term or the application of ergonomics or human factors? Do we have a few on the call today that have like heard the term or maybe have worked with people who do it or have, yeah, okay, Trevor, excellent. Is it a new term? I'm thinking, okay, yes, Mike, okay, excellent. Okay, so we have some familiarity with the topic. I'm not going to go deep dive into the explanation, but I do want to kind of give us some context for the discussion today. So I'm not going to throw out many definitions, but I will give you this one about ergonomics and human factors. As it's very pivotal for this risk focus of preventing interactions with particularly people and mobile equipment and vehicles. So basically, ergonomics, in the earlier definition, you could see that it's both a science and a discipline. So it's basically a compendium of sciences that come together that take a look at socio-technical systems, which is what you see. It's the social, which is the people part, interacting with the technical part, which is often aspects of the workplace and the layout, the controls, the design of machinery, processes, and products, etc. And it's really important. You can see the orange dotted line, and that comprises the system. And you can see that the system is, intersecting human and technical parts that come together to perform work. And so that's where you have, successful or normal work, the day-to-day work that we engage in very often. But in that same space, as you can probably imagine, when you have people coming together with technology, sometimes things don't always go according to plan. And that's where incidents, errors, and mistakes can emerge. Okay, so I wanted to kind of take it back a few decades to like the birth of human factors and ergonomics. And we describe HF by going back to World War II. And there was a seminal study that more or less set the agenda for our discipline that was actually conducted by two experimental psychologists called Fitz and Jones back in the late 1940s. And basically, they were asked to study a very applied problem called pilot error. And the problem that they were facing was that pilots of an aircraft, a particular type of aircraft, were frequently retracting the gear instead of the flaps after landing. And yet this hardly ever happened to pilots of different aircraft types. They noticed themselves that the gear and the flap controls could easily be confused. The nearly identical levers were located right next to each other in an obscure part of the cockpit. And so what they ended up doing is, implementing some risk controls, as you can see on your screen, that actually involve shape coding and basically defining and illuminating and, arranging the controls so that they're not easily confused. And it's interesting because at the outset, the mistake or the belly flopping on the landway was actually or on the runway was actually considered pilot error. However, upon deeper digging, they discovered it wasn't actually pilot error. It was design error. It was, the location and function and use of the controls. And it was the people interacting with those controls. So again, highlighting the importance of, what we do, looking at the interface or the interactions between people and the environment that they work in. So what is it based on? It's based on and derived from a whole collection of sciences. We've got physiology in the lower left-hand corner, which is basically talking about like thermal, visual, auditory, those kinds of things. And then you've got anthropometry to the right, the fit, reach, see, very often associated with office ergonomics, vehicle ergonomics, reaching, access, egress, body size, lifting, twisting, kind of the more the physical side of things. And then top left, we have cognition, and that's now stemming into decision making, information processing, expectations, and it very often we kind of think of ergonomics and human factors as kind of the bottom two, but the cognitive aspects, and then on the right you've got the psychosocial aspects, communication, teamwork, and like the hierarchy of leadership in a company. It spans the whole breadth of it. And I wanted to kind of just illustrate that because I know with ergonomics, I think there's a tendency to kind of think about the physical aspects, but there are these kind of broader domains, organizational aspects, and as well as cognitive aspects that take into account things like communication, scheduling, culture, quality, workload, usability, training. So it's quite broad. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight as we get closer to talking about struck bys. So another really important part about understanding human factors and ergonomics and how it's related to this topic is that in a system, everything is connected to something. Nothing is completely independent. It is organized, it has structure, it has an order, and yet it's quite dynamic. I mean, you've got parts constantly moving and shifting as parts, as you can see, overlap and interact. And as the parts interact, you can see they don't act in isolation. They're constantly moving and interacting and overlapping with one another. And while each part of the system might perform a unique function, you can see they come together to kind of work synergistically. And so what you have is in the system people, organizational or management system practices, and then of course the workplace itself, including the environment, the physical, the tools, the culture, etc., all the workplace aspects. And when you get successful integration, typically, as I said earlier, you get a synergistic effect and a greater total impact than if each component were acting independently. And so what happens is you get all the parts kind of adjusting and changing, coming together, and it happens on a minute-to-minute basis, but as well as day by day, week in and week out. And the best way to understand a workplace system is not through, I'm going to throw out a word here, not through reduction, but through looking at the system holistically or collectively. So as soon as we start to pluck apart the system, which there is this tendency to want to do that, to understand why did the person act that way? Why were they using that truck? Why weren't the lights on? Why weren't you wearing your seatbelt? And so what comes together to create effective and successful work in the wake of something that didn't go according to expectation, very often we want to pull those pieces apart and try to understand it very individually. And there's a really good example of that. One of the biggest databases of MVIs and information related to vehicle crashes, probably no surprise, it comes from police reports. But curiously, those reports actually attribute 90% of traffic accidents to primarily 2 or 3 things. Any thoughts what 1 or 2 of those items might be that you might guess that a police officer or police reports could attribute a traffic accident to? Can you just pop it into the chat? Any thought? Or if you want to unmute, I'd love to hear some voices out there too. What would be 1 or 2 key points that you might find in a police report about struck bys or MVIs? Driver error and distraction. Yes.
Distraction.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's perfect. Yes, distraction, driver error, and inattention. Yeah, and very curiously, it's actually a really high percentage. Like over 90% of all traffic accidents are actually actually lead you back to some of these things. And Grant also added in there weather conditions, which is so true. And so what can happen, it can lead you to the incorrect conclusion that, fix the distraction or fix impairment, which is those are the top three: error, distraction, and impairment. If you just fix them, then you're going to have safer roads or safer work sites. It's just that those reports don't recognize the very complex nature of construction sites, forestry sites, and road sites where we know multiple factors interact, which result in the incident. And so this kind of simplistic representation of traffic has kind of got us into a situation now where we are kind of disregarding the interactions, which are so important and are actually underpinning how we do work every single day. And worse, it actually disregards those interactions between the road user, the environment, the vehicle, and even the Ministry of Labor has added in to their safe systems approach, looking at road usability to look at speed as well. So how the vehicle is used. So just to recognize the system and all the players come together to create normal work, and it's really important to look at it holistically. Okay, so another really key point, just to I'm kind of front loading with some information about ergonomics and system, is this principle. This is one of the most important principles for takeaway for today, that really nobody is going to work to do a bad job. They're not intending to create harmful outcomes. They're not intending to get hurt or hurt somebody else. And if we think about it in relation to ourselves, it's often a very great starting point, because you have to believe, like when you're driving, you will not do something that doesn't make sense. Otherwise, you will not do it. If it doesn't make sense to swerve, like just randomly, you won't do it. But yet if there's a bicycle or a child or a soccer ball, you might, So the belief that workers are doing what makes sense often escapes us or eludes us in hindsight when something's gone wrong. Like at the outset, I might say, oh, workers are doing things that make sense. But then, when we have incidents and surprises and outcomes that are untoward that we don't want on our work sites, then we kind of stand back in hindsight, and when we're not in their shoes, judgment can come in and say, what were they thinking? And we start to lose sight of that local rationality principle. So our job really is to understand why and how it made sense to the people on site, because if it made sense to them, it's going to make sense to others, and it's going to happen again. And conversely, saying what people failed to do, like failed to wear the seatbelt, failed to check, failed to turn, failed to navigate, failed to stay within the walkway. It's really hard to look at failures or should have dones or could have dones. And in actual fact, it doesn't actually explain what did happen. So given the resources and timelines that we all know are constrained, we're all doing our best to fulfill really the goal, which is to accomplish work. And there's no intent to make harm or to do harm or make errors. And that's really an important point. Okay, so why ergonomics and human factors? Well, essentially, it is the key to unlock understanding about how work happens. Once you understand how work happens, then you apply some of the principles that I'm going to be giving you later to understand these interactions and how to actually improve them. People interact with all aspects of the work system, and so once we understand those interactions, we can do a better job at prioritizing what needs to be fixed and do it well. And so how are we going to go about doing this? Well, I'm going to try to give you some tools for today. I'm The plan is to build your understanding and engage, hopefully my expertise, but I'm hoping to engage your expertise as I've already done. We want to get some experience with using a few tools that I've embedded into the presentation. And then I want to provide you some opportunities to consider what might be a priority at your workplace, and then encourage you to develop and collaborate with your local experts, the people that do the work, your JOHS committee members, Works APC, maybe a local prevention officer, and how we can collectively move the conversation forward. Okay, so I want to now kind of stop there, and we're going to head into explaining why preventing struck bys is a key risk focus. And it's interesting because I said it's a stubborn risk, but there's a whole lot more to it. And as you're going to see, there's 5 main reasons why we're looking at this, and kind of the opposite or the converse of each point that I'm going to be raising, you're going to see will lead you in a way to prevent these incidents and how to do it in an effective way. And I'll summarize that near the end. So it all started over a decade ago now. Some of you may be familiar with this incident. There's been bulletins, human factor bulletins that have gone out about this very incident, and it has literally been an incident that's gained a lot of traction. I audit and I attend different webinars, and I've seen this presented by companies well outside the purview of those in BC and outside the purview of Works APC. So there's a lot of good lessons here. So this is a photo from the Golden Ears Bridge construction project that, as you all know, is quite some time ago. But what happened is you had a construction site manager arriving on site before the loads were scheduled to arrive. And so he parks his truck on the berm that's adjacent to that concrete wall that you can see. And then while parking, these dump trucks start arriving on site. One unhitched the trailer and reversed and released its load. And then after leaving his vehicle, the manager, he ends up walking over to look at some settlement gauges, and he's engaging during this time on a call to the site engineer about the gauges. And then during that time, he's moving around in that general area, and the spotter that you can see in the red rectangle, he's moving around and he's checking around and he's signaling. And at the moment that the worker gets behind the truck, the signaler actually turns his head away from the supervisor, and unfortunately the rear tires catch the manager's leg. The driver had checked his mirrors, and he did have a loud and functioning tonal backup alarm. And it was sounding normally. So when we paired with engineering and audiology and our department, HF, to try to understand why this incident took place, it put us on a path that we didn't realize we'd probably be on, over a decade later, because there's many layers of protection, as you can see, and there's no one individual layer that's broken. It's not like the alarm wasn't working. It's not like the mirrors had been torn off. There's not one thing that is broken that we'd say, oh, fix this and it will go away. So really important here to understand about when it comes to struck bys, context drives actions and decisions. That's a very important point. And multiple layers of protection do offer, some mitigation layers. However, you can see, even though there's many in this situation, it may not always turn out the way we want. And sometimes how these incidents happen is you've got multiple parts interacting, as I've described. You've got people interacting with technology, and they're trying to do the work. So you've got all the components, the management pieces or the organizational pieces, the human pieces and the technical pieces coming together, and there's no one part that's broken, which caused a lot of questions. So that kind of takes us to our first key reason why we have this key risk focus still with us today, and it's system connections. Systems are literally in a system. Everything is connected to something. Nothing is completely independent, and multiple unbroken parts often intersect, and sometimes things don't go according to plan. So in your environments where you've got mills, yards, warehouses, landing areas, you've got workers with a particular focus, a line of sight, working with and near different types of equipment, computers. You've got geomatics workers engaging with their phones, their cameras, and other technology. Following plans, maybe they're bringing materials, and often, there's equipment bringing workers on site, and all together working in very close proximity to vehicle while they're doing their tasks. Tasks doing what? Tasks using technology, maybe laying pipe, and all the while freely moving around the work site or the job site, and with lots of influences. Things are very dynamic. The pace of work might be shifting. You've got environmental factors, hours of work that can influence time of day, overtime, etc. And so you've got a lot of things coming together. And one of the main reasons why this risk is still with us is because work is complex. You've got all these interactions going on. It's not a simple system. It's not even a complicated system. It's a complex system where you can't always predict what's going to be happening. So this is just an example of a construction site where you've got many vehicles, multiple subcontractors, potentially members of the public, surveyors, potentially the regulator, potentially municipalities and other people on site. And you can imagine, there's this kind of common or this idea out there that, we often will hear a distraction or complacency. And when it comes to distraction, you can imagine there's a lot of distractions on this work site. Things that you might see out of the corner of your eye, moving equipment, raising a load, moving a load, new vehicles coming on site. So distraction is actually really a function of the environment. And that's something that often gets overlooked. We often associate it with the person. They say, oh, the person is distracted. And it's not always entirely that way. On this site, you're going to have multiple alarms, and curiously, with the tonal alarm that you have, they can be masked. And so in some cases, they go undetected. If you've got loud alarms that are very annoying, we've been on sites where, they're muffled. Maybe they're possibly even disabled. And when you have many tonal alarms and different alarms on different equipment interacting, it's really difficult to understand where's that sound coming from. And then kind of the corollary to that is you ignore it. Like, oh, it doesn't apply to me. You might also have other traffic, other traffic, different types of vehicles, which can create blind spots just due to the sheer size of some equipment, because they're so high up, and they might have attachments, and the mirrors are imperfect. They might not be properly adjusted, and it creates a lot of potential for missing things. Your lines of sight are sometimes a bit blocked. There's other organizational aspects, the proximity to roadways, just weather, time of day fluctuations, and how the work site is arranged, and like the layout and the congestion during different phases of construction. So just to show that it's really complex. And so there's not these single factors that we can kind of point to that makes it easy to fix. So the second reason why we've been hard at this risk for multiple years is how we've opted to predominantly control the risk. So we know that the hazard is often related to proximity to large vehicles, the blind spots, noise, and attachments that obstruct vision. And when you have proximity and you have people interacting with equipment, there's a real danger. There's a very high risk of serious injuries from contact. You could be crushed by loads. Of course, there's property damage. And I mean, nobody wants to hear, but I mean, there's near misses and being stricken by these vehicles or run over by them. And so what are some of the control measures what are some of the common control measures that you've seen out there? You just want to pop it into the chat. What are some controls that you know about, maybe you've implemented or that you've seen out there? Maybe you're driving by a construction site or a logging site, or some things that you know are being used to control the hazard of preventing struck-bys. So Patrick says barriers between people and usually signage and administrative. Yep. RFID, proximity alarms, control zones. Yeah, proximity alarms. Okay. Yeah. Going back to what I think it was what John was saying. Very often, the first go-to would be like, oh, somebody's not wearing their vest. Let's give them a vest. Let's make sure they're wearing their vest, or maintaining. And I've got, analyses from different companies on my desk at the moment where it says, use your hands, maintain eye contact at all time, and pay attention at all times. And so you can see that most of those control measures sit at the lowest end of the hierarchy, administrative or PPE. And now some of the ones that you've mentioned are a bit further up, and we'll talk about those. But maintaining good communication with operators and drivers, that begs interaction with the driver and begs proximity, which will be problematic. Using proper hand signals is important, and I know it's done, but again, it as a single line of defense, it won't be as effective as we'd like it to be. Verbal communication, strong verbal communication, even I've seen it described different ways. Again, it's written down in procedures that I've read, and it can be confusing. And how are you communicating with an operator with the machine running? Stay clear warnings and paying attention warnings. They all require some level of interpretation and a lot of reliance on the human to get it right every single time. And we know from experience that doesn't always happen. Okay, so number 3, why we're still kind of really focused on this risk is how we look at incident causation. And this is really a key point, because how we look at how incidents happen is the key to our ability to actually prevent and then ultimately learn from incidents. So we tend to have, the belief that there's often a single root cause. And so you've got people on site, and in incidents that we've investigated, you might hear, oh, it was there, the worker was in the blind spot. And so the tendency might be to believe if we tackle the blind spot, like maybe lower the load or get the person out of the way, we can fix what the issue is. But it's typically not ever so simple. It's not usually a single root cause. But our tendency is to want, like especially post-incident, after an event that's unwanted, we kind of, rather than going forward and understanding what happened, we tend to go backwards from the incident, looking for things that that may be problematic. Not wearing a high-vis vest, not wearing boots, not paying attention, not maintaining eye contact. And I mean, the list goes on and on. And by having a focus on single local causes, losing eye contact, maybe the mirrors were dirty or not adjusted, lack of PPE, headphones, alarms, lack of seatbelt use, and I can't make this stuff up, like even lack of breakfast, that may lower one's attentive levels. It has been mentioned, when it comes to some of these struck by incidents. So you can see there's a lot of kind of individual focus on what is that one thing that may have contributed to it. And the thing, when we look at focus on single local causes, we've kind of lost sight of the bigger system. So it kind of is summarized here with the system focus up top. This is what we need to be looking at, but there tends to be a focus on this part, the paying attention, the distraction, and not following a safe work procedure or not paying attention, losing eye contact, failed to jump out of the way, or failed to hear the alarm. These are all things that kind of tend to surface, and by focusing on only one part of the system, it kind of keeps us locked into having these kinds of incidents perpetuate. So in this example, just an illustration of how we sometimes focus on human performance aspects. You've got a rolling machine that was laying a mat in a north-south direction, and you had a worker that was assigned to collect samples on an east-west mat, indicated by the X on your screen, and then the operator, who's at 90 degrees, seated at 90 degrees to the direction of travel, sees a worker at last minute and yells for him to move. So, in that case, you're looking at lines of sight, which is going to be influenced by what? The direction of travel and the direction that the seat is positioned in. Hearing. That's going to be influenced by hearing protection devices, other alarms that may be around, and whether or not they're used to hearing the alarms. You get so used to hearing alarms, you tend to be habituated to it. And then when you become quite familiar, then, it becomes white noise. And then reaction time, failed to jump out of the way. Yelling at somebody who may have hearing protection on and expecting them to jump out of the way when they may not even know that they're being encroached upon, that doesn't always tend to work out as effectively as we might like. And, in showing this example, a clever comment was made one time and says, how is it that you can't detect an elephant that's creeping up on you? And I asked the question, like, how is that even possible? How is it that such a large machine encroaching on you, wouldn't be noticed, heard, or detected in some way? And we've seen it over and over again. And so I think it's a really good, rather than going, oh, well, the worker should have been paying attention, and of course you would detect an elephant walking up on, or walking or approaching up on you, taking that in a kind of a different light or in a different vein, and saying, we might not be able always to detect the large dump truck encroaching or the large rolling machine, and how can we keep our workers safe, knowing that we can't hear and see and detect all things around us at all times. There was a really good magazine article that just came out, and there was use of RFIDs up at Site C, and one of the managers up at Site C was talking about that very thing, that we can't see, notice, and detect all things around us consistently. Okay, so I wanted to just talk about, we're still talking about why the risk focus, and this is another part of the risk focus. There's been a reliance on these tones. You've got the tonal, which we're probably all very familiar with, but we've also got the broadband that I'll talk about. So the tonal alarm was first manufactured in the early 60s, and the Yamaguchi Electric Company invented it. But those details are less important. What is important is that it was invented on the premise that the louder the better. The louder the alarm, the better it will be to warn people of an encroaching vehicle. And the problem with that is that even though it's used extensively to warn people in the vicinity of vehicles reversing, that there's a big problem with the volume level between 97 and 120 or 112 dB, but the frequency range is going up to approximately 3,000 hertz, because it exceeds the hearing range, the effective hearing range. Sounds between 1,000 and 2,000, let alone beyond 2,000, are very difficult to localize. And so many devices designed to get our attention, like going back to our earlier question, how is it that you don't know that something's backing up on you? So many of the warning devices that we have with the goal of letting them know that something's coming are actually rendered ineffective based on our human hearing capacity. And so, and it's not just with trucks. I mean, it comes in the form of elevating equipment, forward moving equipment, reversing equipment, emergency medical services, vehicles. And so you can imagine that, it becomes white noise after a while. The single tone is it basically bounces around like a Indian plastic ball, like being bounced. Like it goes in a lot of different directions. And with hearing protection devices, HPDs, you actually have poor audibility. And I mentioned earlier about difficult to localize and the habituation concerns, because it's such a uniform uniform sound that, you know, it can be masked by other vehicles. So that takes us to the broadband, which some of you, Bill was characterizing it as a quacking duck. Have some of you heard the quacking duck sound before? Do you want to shoot up a few thumbs to let me know if you've heard the broadband alarm, or if you are working with vehicles with the broadband alarm installed? So nobody's heard it and nobody's working with vehicles. I know the city of maybe it wasn't, I know Lafarge and I know University of Victoria has outfitted their fleet with the broadband alarms. It's not taken off as much as I think the manufacturers would have thought. And it is available, and it does have some advantages that I've listed on the screen for you. So what happens is you get a broad band of noises that come together that create this kind of unfamiliar quacking duck sound. And with the multiple frequencies, it's actually easier to locate. So when we were on site at UVic, we noticed that it was you were able to detect the alarm even with other vehicles being around when you were in the hazard zone. And with the tonal alarm, the problem is that, you know, it propagates for 3 kilometers. So now it's propagating well beyond the hazard zone. So in my office can hear vehicles with their reversing alarm on in the laneway. And with the reduced environmental noise annoyance, there's less tendency to want to muffle it or turn it off or disable it or remove it, which we've seen. And the sound dissipates beyond the hazard zone. So you don't have the same level of interference. But the downside when we did our study was that a large number of workers, supervisors, and the people that would interact with this alarm were not consistently recognizing it as a warning signal. And of course, that can be problematic. It would have to be paired with some training to make it effective. Okay, and then fifth, probably not surprising, and I know typically Works APC would lead the discussion with talking about a risk by talking about statistics, but with this one, it's so complex that the metrics trail the other factors, and so for many employers, we've actually, you know, where they've had an incident, you know, we'll hear the story. This has never happened to us. And so a big part of why the metrics or the statistics trail is because they don't tell the whole story and often don't account for the near misses. And so that's why it's not kind of a front running indicator. So just the metrics alone, when we did a 10-year rolling look at some of the like the windows, looking at statistics, you know, you're having 16, and it's actually spiked up to even 18 work-related struck by fatals, and it was in a 15-year window that we looked at in this case, but we've also looked at 10-year windows as well. And there's been many reversing incidents, not always resulting in an injury, but this is what spiked our interest way back at the outset, looking at the Golden Ears incident, because there was so many struck by incidents. And then, of course, of those incidents, we began to take a deeper dive and wondering what's going on. And actually, a shockingly high number of incidents were actually happening where there were effective, loud, operational backup alarms. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about why the risk focus. It's a stubborn risk, and we haven't been doing a great job of effectively preventing the risk. And, you know, we've got these interaction pieces with people and different factors that come together. So what are those key factors that contribute to the incidents? Well, I'm going to kick us off with a question. What are some of the hazards that you know of working around mobile equipment? Have you been around mobile equipment, or you're supervising people around mobile equipment? And what might keep you up at night, or what are you most concerned about? You could unmute or just pop something into the chat. Some of the vehicles, or sorry, some of the hazards, I should say, around working around vehicles and mobile equipment is, of course, the proximity. That's the kind of the number one factor. But the loads or materials that they're carrying can create blind spots where the operator may not be able to see properly. Attachments can do something similar where it obscures lines of sight. There's also proximity to overhead power lines that may be a hazard when operating vehicles and mobile equipment. And of course, noise. Noise made by vehicles and equipment can, understandably make it difficult to hear people approaching, or warning devices as well. So the factors to consider are listed for you on your screen, and Tammy was nice enough to send around the links. And the first bulletin talks about these factors of planning, equipment, task, environment, and people. So I'm just going to run through these factors kind of collectively and show how they play a role in struck by incidents. And it's curious that these same factors it's not just a local provincial thing or a national thing. I mean, other agencies like the Health and Safety Executive in the UK have also come up with the same 5 categories of accident causes. And so in the first one, you've got planning and proximity. So things that can contribute to planning and proximity can include like the project work plan, maybe even scheduling when loads are arriving, work hours when you have busy work sites at certain particular times, traffic plans or maybe lack thereof, and work location. So those are things that kind of relate to planning and proximity. And then, of course, the equipment itself, the suitability of the equipment for the task. That could be a question. The blind spots that certain vehicles create, controls, the use of phones on site. It's not always just for personal use. It was well said in a webinar not too long ago that there's more technology used for work on site today than there ever has been in the past. And so that's creating some new challenges. But there's also mirrors, cameras, alarms, and other technology that might be considered under the equipment category. And then the task is basically what the workers are engaging in at the time, and it would change from what the operator is doing to what maybe people on the ground are doing. So what's the goal or the objective? One might be delivering a load, but one might be carrying a load from point A to point B, and then asking, what are the sight lines for people doing the tasks? Who are they interacting with? Who's doing the task? What is the pace of the work, and scheduling? And then we have environment. What are some of the site conditions, the layout, the location of signs, what are the space requirements on site? These are all factors that, to a lesser or greater degree, play some role in incidents. And then finally, of course, we have people, and all the strengths and limitations that they bring to the table, including their attention, expectations, line of sight, their position, their posture, and PPE that they're given. So those are the main factors to consider. And I put them together in this way so that you can see, again, that they overlap and one influences the other. It's meant to show that, the factors influence each other and they all kind of come together dynamically. And I've highlighted that, in a workplace system, like there's going to be different aspects of each one of these that come together. So I want to jump in now to talk about factors to consider. This is kind of a artistic rendition of a manufacturing warehouse where they were packaging product for delivery off-site. And you can see in kind of the center of your screen, you've got this white packaging that's being moved with a pallet jack. And then you've got a worker moving a container, like a bin. You've got another forklift in behind, and the facility operates 2 shifts. Workers have been onboarded and given training plans, and the forklift drivers are certified. And for this task that you can see, waste cardboard is pushed to recycling bins across the plant. And throughout the corridor here, by this yellow over here, there's a walkway sign, and there's signs posted to say, watch out at the entrance to various coolers that are located along the way. And so some of the factors to consider, I tried to come up with a clever way of itemizing this into like an acronym, like the planning, environment, task, equipment, and the human performance piece, but I haven't been able to do it. So, the factors to consider for planning, you've got scheduling of work. When is the waste cardboard being delivered to the waste bin, and what is, how is that intersecting with travel routes and, the work of the other pallet jacks moving product throughout the day. And you have equipment. So looking at the pallet jacks, looking at the forklifts and other types of equipment. There were genie lifts and other kinds of equipment on site that we noticed. And then you've got the task. So you'd have the task of different people, the task both of the person maybe moving the waste, but you've got operators and what is their goal and layout around lines of sight, or what's their visibility and what is their plan. And you've also have environment. So the travel path, maybe it's potentially the lighting, signage that I mentioned, and perhaps it's the noise. Now you're not in a staging area of a forestry site or outside. You're now in a warehouse where there could be interference with alarms and other noises. And then circling back to the H for human performance, or the people aspects, very often when people are, in a pathway, you can see it's obscured, but there's a path here. They're not expecting to have other equipment. So maybe it's expectations. There could be also lines of sight and communication factors to consider. And so that was just kind of an overview of a work example. And now I want to jump into some of the tools to help you first understand and then prevent and reduce risk of struck by incidents. So the first one that I'm going to get into is the template and the guide. So Tammy has given the links to these tools. They're also on our website, and I just kind of wanted to, if you're able to pull them out or see them on your screen. The first one is the guide. That's on the left-hand side of your screen, and that's my VPN indicator. That's on our website. So the first one is the instructions on how to use the fillable template. And then on the right-hand side, you actually have the fillable template. And so the guide will basically take you through all the steps to fill in the template. And that's what we're going to do in a little mini exercise as we get started and try to understand how to work the tools. So in the first tool, the fillable template, you can read it there a little bit. It's a tool, a help for employers to reduce risk of workers on foot interacting with mobile equipment. And this can be really a useful tool to help identify where on your work site you have vehicles operating near workers and figure out the best ways to eliminate or minimize the risk. So the first step is going to be drawing the layout of your work site. I don't mean architectural drawings and getting fancy about buildings and specific measurements of corridors and different things like that, but like a rough understanding of where maybe you have access, egress, where you have travel paths, where you have vehicles moving equipment, moving materials, etc. So you want to get a kind of let's call it like a bird's eye view, a general layout of the work site. And then from that, you're going to circle areas where you know you've got people interacting with vehicles or vice versa. And it just draws your attention in a very visible way to areas on your site where you probably already know, okay, that's a priority for us to tackle. But sometimes the visibility of this drawing can really help illuminate areas that maybe weren't on your radar. So in this example, we've just tried to showcase a little bit about that. This is a bit of a nicer drawing by a prevention officer than I might actually myself do. You know, the telehandler might not have wheels. It might just be a box with, you know, a driver in it, like a stick man. But you basically want to show the path of the vehicle here, you know, with an arrow to unload trucks. You've got a plywood stack over here coming over here. You've got, you know, wood pile over here. You've got a building, you know, just roughly shown. And then what we've gone and done is, so you've got just a kind of a bird's eye view of the work site. And then we've used circles to indicate areas on the worksite where vehicles and mobile equipment overlap, and where maybe vehicles and pedestrians are passing through the worksite. So that's an example of how it how it might look. And you want to really consider areas where you've got you know, people offloading material. Usually the material we've seen being delivered in some way, shape, or form by a vehicle or mobile equipment, and then people have to access the loads in some way, shape, or form. And in those situations, you often have multiple contractors that share a common workspace, and we find very often there's maybe restrictions on the space. So you have congestion, and when you have congestion with, you know, different types of vehicles and workers on foot, those would be prime areas for circling and maybe spending a bit of time and creating them as a priority. Okay, so then moving on to step 3. So we've got, and truthfully, how this came about was in a very benign, very simple way, like just pulling out a sheet of paper. And I know it's been done on the back of a napkin before, and say, okay, if you've got a building here and you've got workers here and you've got your forklifts here, like, let's just take a look at this. And where do we have them? So it did start out, you know, very simplistically, very, you know, grassroots. And once you circled it, you know, there's been employers that say, like, you know, they can see where the priorities are. It becomes immediately kind of available to them, rather than having be a guessing game or having to, you know, assume that they think they know where the priorities are. So the step 3 is describing the task and factors. This doesn't always have to happen. Sometimes when, you know, you've got workers intersecting with forklifts and mobile equipment, there might be ways to separate them right out of the gate. So you're not going to go down this path of, you know, looking at that location and what can we do. But there are other times, like in warehouses and in more confined space, where, you know, they're saying, like, Heather, it's really difficult for us to, you know, separate. And so you might want to delve into it a little bit further to understand the task that's going on and the factors that are influencing it. And how we do that is by going into this table that I'm going to illustrate. And then using the table will take you straight away into implementing effective risk control measures. And the two kind of go hand in hand. One, once you do the once you ask those questions, it kind of highlights what an effective practice will be. So in this example, we used, you know, under task, like we use the example of unloading building materials from a pallet to a work area, and always asking the question to understand what the work is. Asking why are workers near the vehicles or equipment? Like, what are they doing? like there's a reason why they're there. They're delivering pipe, they're laying pipe, they're checking settlement gauges, they're on their route to take a break. Like there's a reason why they're passing so close, or why the vehicles are coming so close to the geomatics worker, because they were delivering pipe, or they had to deliver a load of some sort. And so to understand what that first task is really is a super helpful good starting point. And then from the bulletin, just the bulletin alone, or from this presentation alone, we've got 5 factors. And what are those factors that escalate the risk? And so if you've got planning, like we don't have a plan for movement of vehicles on site, maybe that's part of it. Or maybe workers and equipment just regularly share the same space, and that's always how we've done it, and hasn't been much consideration given to it previously. Or maybe it's how the material is stored and stacked that creates blind spots that create points of interaction that would be unwanted. So those are some examples. And so you can see, if you have mobile equipment operating near workers, I mean, the next step would be, can we separate workers, or mobile equipment and workers are sharing the same space? You know, it was mentioned before about barriers. Can we use barriers or some sort of physical barricade to keep the people separate from the vehicles? And then identifying areas for both workers and or material and or mobile equipment. Those are just some. There's loads more very effective risk control measures, both in the bulletin and in the guide on our website. And at the end of this presentation, I've supplied a number of really excellent resources that can further help that conversation. Okay, so I want to get into a bit of an exercise now. So this is a pallet repair yard, and workers stand at work tables under a covered area, and they're refurbishing pallets. What the workers do is they grab the pallets from a stack, replace the broken slats, they add nails, and then basically restack them on the stacks that you see there on your screen. And then the pallets are removed by forklifts from workstations to the outside stacks that you can see in the lower part of your screen over here. And this happens continuously throughout the day. So I'd like you to use just the bulletin to list maybe 1 or 2 bullet items for each factor. So just I'll give you I'll set the timer here, just like honestly just like a 1-minute reflection exercise, just quietly. You can, have a sip of coffee and just jot down some notes in there, and then we'll share it back in just a minute and a half or so. Okay, so we can get started with that. Okay, who is there anyone brave enough to just quickly unmute and maybe share 1 or 2 things that they've found, say in the chart? Like, I'm not going to go category by category, but just some things that you've discovered or that you've written down.
Hi, Heather. Under environment, sunlight, glare, light conditions, changing light conditions.
Absolutely, good catches for sure. What about for another factor?
just the planning and proximity where we have equipment interfacing with pedestrians.
Mhm.
It seems to be a big problem there.
Absolutely. So you get how it could work. You just go through the using just the bulletin. This can be an exercise at the joint occupational health and safety committee level. It can be a tool that you can use to supplement an incident investigation report, or maybe a near miss report, or if you're doing learning events, a learning team even, where you're coming together. We just recently we were working with a large construction contractor that had a very serious incident. I had 1 hour of time with people from Texas all the way through to Western Canada, and we looked at normal work. And we went basically through this checklist. What are some of these aspects that may have escalated the risk? And the point of doing this is, I don't anticipate that on your during your discoveries that you're going to list off 18 factors. I've given you some examples here. You may want to use the bulletin and circle some things, and maybe highlight some things that you hadn't thought of before. Things that I mean, time of day is just not one thing that usually pops up. It's usually like the task, the environment, the people, the there's different, more obvious things. And so looking at it may say, hey, do we need to be doing that task in the middle of the night, or something along those lines? But it can be a really good, useful conversation starter, and to help guide and make for a more fulsome understanding of the work and what may contribute to escalating the risk. Okay, so another tool that I'm going to introduce is the Shell model. Has anyone heard of the Shell model? Has anyone attended like our Human Factors Incident Investigation course? Just a thumbs up if you have, if you've heard of Shell before. It's a model that comes from the aviation industry, but it's a generic model, and we use it all the time in our human factors approach to safety and investigation workshops. And it can work in we use it for every kind of investigation that we do. So whether or not it's turning boards and a board came back and struck an individual, or whether or not they were run over, or whether or not there was an exposure to a toxic substance. I mean, it can work across the gamut of all the different work environments that we might be working in. So it's basically just a different data collection model. I've introduced you one data collection model, and some others may like this data collection model. The earlier circles relate specifically to struck bys, that each one of those factors will relate to some degree a struck by incident. This model can be used for struck bys, cuts, back injuries, slips and trips, and a whole variety of other things. So it's a more fulsome, so it will cover off the first, or like the former, and the latter as well. And you can see the description of the categories there. And so software is basically the paper side of the system. It's all your rules, safe work procedures, regulations, manuals, reporting procedures, scheduling, task, everything that's written down. It's all the soft side of it. Then there's hardware, and that is essentially like the hard side of the system. All the technology, vehicles, tools, controls, signery, everything that's physical. So when it comes to lighting, you've got the light itself, the light fixture, but then you've got the light level, which would fall under environment. And then for under environment, you've got things that we're probably very familiar with, like in terms of like the temperature, the visibility, the noise, vibration. But we also capture under there engagement or organizational culture aspects. And then the two L's are kind of maybe a new term, but it's liveware. It's the living part of the system. And for an incident, the central L is often the worker that may have been involved in the incident. But with struck bys, there's often two L's. We've got the operator, as well as possibly a person that may have been in a near miss incident or worse. And then you may also have peripheral L, like supervisors and other personnel like coworkers, maybe members of the public, subcontractors, EMS, people making deliveries to site, etc. So it offers just a nice framework to both collect data and then organize any kind of report. Like have we captured all the data that we need to make a fulsome report? Because I mean, one of the reasons why we're here is because we do see a lot of incidents where, there's a very serious incident and we see loss of situational awareness or lack of attention. And so that just doesn't describe fully what we really have going on. And this tool can help with that. So this is an example where you can see a transport truck was making a delivery to site. It was a situation where you had both transport trucks and workers sharing the same workspace, and there was an incident that resulted. And so we used the shell model to uncover the different aspects. So under software, you can see we looked at the task requirements, we looked at the traffic plan, scheduling, how many near misses in the work yard had there been, what is the procedure for reporting? Is there one even? What's the procedure for the task? Like, why were they going in? Like, why were they going through the work yard? Is that normal? Is there a reason for it? What kind of training and orientation? And then under hardware, there's definitely mixed vehicle, like what are the implications in terms of lines of sight, the pathways, the mirrors, lights, not just yard lighting, but also headlights and that sort of thing. Any feedback to the driver? Some of them had cameras, some of them didn't. What were the blind spots, etc. Moving over to environment, there was things like there were some pedestrian areas that we looked at, pathways, the layout of the site, corners and incentives in terms of production levels. So that was influencing paths that workers were taking. And then the living or the liveware side of it. So you've got the driver and or the person that may have been involved with it, that the pedestrian person, and then you've got communication, coordination, and deliveries of other peripheral people that may be involved in the incident. So this is a good slide. You'll have it as part of this presentation to take a picture of or to use going forward. It's a nice illustration of how to look at incidents in a more fulsome way. And so in this incident, this example, you've got a worker, and this would be an example that you could take a turn on with your Joint Health and Safety Committee and, bring it to your safety leaders and ask, like, so what do we have going on here? What are the software, hardware, environment, and liveware aspects that we see and what's going on? And then they could go through it, do a whiteboard exercise, and then just start populating the fields. And what are you coming up with? And then you've got basically an answer key. Some of the software aspects from terms of work procedures, risk assessment, training, orientation. Very often, irregardless of whether or not it's a struck by incident or maybe a different kind of incident, you may see that some of these software elements do apply across different incidents. But hardware, we were looking at the operator feedback, blind spots, warning devices, the material that the worker was handling. How do they communicate? How do they interact on the floor to know that loads are being moved? Pedestrian paths, the warehouse layout, those blind corners, and then the liveware aspects, both central and peripheral liveware. So it's a good exercise for you to collectively go back. And then people might say, well, what is the connection using Shell with all of these aspects? Like, there's a lot of aspects on the screen here, and like, what do we do? Fix it all? Like, how do we use the information? Well, one way that we've seen it being used and that we use it is by just drawing the connections. You've got task requirements that link to experience. Well, a novice worker does it a little bit differently than an expert worker, or training will help set expectations for the task. Or you've got mixed traffic and you've got blind corners when you've got bigger equipment and smaller equipment, or you've got mobile equipment connecting with warehouse layout. Like, you can see how the different aspects influence each other. And so the goal of this exercise is to look at all the factors that are contributing to an incident, but also to not lose sight of the fact that it's a system. Like, it's not just we have to pay attention, or we have to add in lights or give out vests. Those are good things, but then to show that those elements influence other parts of the system, and it has to be considered kind of all together. And then another tool that we've used, and Kaylee was online, and sure maybe many of you know about the bow tie model. We've been using it with employers and have had wonderful success. The bow tie model, the plan isn't to go through it in great detail, but just on a high level, you've got the hazard, which is a thing or activity or a condition that has the potential to cause harm. And you want to define fairly specifically what the hazardous thing is, and maybe even the location. And then you've got the top event circled there in red, which is the unwanted event. And threats to your left are in blue, and they're basically the factors that can cause that top event or trigger the action or the condition. And for those threats, you really want to be specific. We have done it with employers where they might say, well, it was human error, or it was weather or supervision. And those are quite vague. You want to get quite a bit more specific. And then consequences are on the right, and that can be the injury, the harm, or the damage that may be a consequence. And then you've got the barriers on both sides. And the barriers are those that come into place that prevent the top event. And then you've got mitigation barriers that reduce the severity of the consequence. So that's kind of the high level version of a bow tie. So what we've done with our bow tie is turned it into something like this, which we can share. We've operationalized it, and it's actually been a really great tool. We've worked with B&B Contracting. We've worked with other large contractors to engage them in the conversation. And again, you've got your hazard here, workers on foot around mobile equipment, and then you've got the top event in red, proximity, and it was set at less than 10 feet. This is not set in stone, and it's not in the regulation, but it's what we used to define our top event. And then we just went through a conversation with employers. This is a much simplified version of a bow tie, but these were the key elements that contributed to the top event. And so, or top event here. And so what we ended up doing is taking all the answers from employers and putting it basically in a sequence. So you've got the most effective in red here on this side and the least effective over here. And so in a conversation on site, often with mobile equipment around us, like it's a very dynamic conversation. What do you have in place? Oh, we've got designated foot traffic paths. We educate our workers. We make sure our alarms are functional. We do checks. We providing communication to all workers about the safe work community, safe work or safe movement of vehicles. And so you can begin to see where they're going, and you check it off, and it's a nice visual. And then what we've been able to do, though, is push the conversation to get to help them to think outside the box, both literally and figuratively. And so it's been a really great tool because it's a very visual tool that says, okay, we're doing a bunch of great stuff. They were doing a bunch of great stuff when it came to golden ears. They had a number of layers of protection in place, and yet that resulted in a fatal. So what can we do better to prevent these interactions that can lead to very serious and fatal kind of incidents? This is another good exercise that you would maybe like to go through with the Joint Health and Safety Committee, asking the question, what would you do? What would you do here? And I mean, you can pull a, cartoon construction site or a cartoon, any kind of warehouse site. And, some people, joke, oh, I sure hope that's not your website or that's not your work site. And I would hope that that's not your work site, but it's a good exercise. So you could engage them and say, okay, so if you're the safety coordinator or the superintendent, as some of your positions are, you come in and this is what you're walking into. Where do you start with some of this and start engaging in the conversation? And some of the things that we might see out there is, well, we're going to definitely start with enforcing walkways. We're going to educate our workers. Everybody's got to be given a vest. They got to be told to wear the vest. They have to, be visible. We're going to train our vehicle operators. We're going to add lights. I saw the blue halo lights. That's something. Maybe we could add more lighting. We've seen flood lighting added. We're going to install cameras. We're going to do 360-degree view cameras. We're going to, get feedback to the workers. We're going to put up barriers. We're going to segregate where we can. It's not always possible, but we'll do what we can. And then, even some people say, well, wait a second, we're going to stop work. Don't know how effective the stop work might be, but we hear all sorts of answers, and these are good answers. They're all correct and they all add value. But what we wanted to kind of move to today is first trying to understand the work before moving to conclusions about what would be best and most effective to prevent the incident from happening. I want to preface it with where people are interfacing and there's a known solution and it will immediately make workers safe. We don't want to draw out a risk analysis process, but very often we see those questions of paint lines, add lights, hand out vests, and it's kind of a very whack-a-mole or very scattered approach to something that's needs a little bit more understanding or a bit more understanding where the key risks are. And so by asking these questions, it's a great starting point. So in that very serious incident that I attended within that 1 hour, we were able to kind of unpack some of the key factors that were escalating risk. And we weren't talking about the incident even. We said, how does that person do the job the day before or the week before when nothing happened? And all we were talking about is the work. As soon as you start talking about the work, you understand where all those key interactions are, that you've got forklifts going into this covered area with pallets and brushing by workers, and then creating some priorities that way. So all we're suggesting is to take a step back from immediately kind of diving into painting lines, because we see it time and time again. And I've been engaged with companies saying, Heather, they want to put up rails, they want to paint lines, they want to get cameras, they want to do a lot of good things. And like, that's not something to stop, but to focus the area and to make sure we're being very effective. These questions can go a long way, and you'll be surprised at what you may reveal. There'd be some surprising answers, that some of the conclusions and some of the risk mitigation efforts may not be as fancy or as expensive as maybe you originally thought they might be. And the whole idea of asking questions recognizes that some of the key information about work comes from the people who do the work, from the front line, or what we call the sharp end. And they can help us understand how the work is normally done. And yes, the shortcuts and what we call efficiencies that happen as a regular part of work that are applauded on most every day when work goes successfully, but may have implications for the barriers that you choose, or maybe if it's a shortcut or an efficiency that's become quite embedded, maybe the work process needs to change to understand that maybe things need to be done differently. And that can only be done if we kind of dive into, and this is a great exercise with the Joint Health and Safety Committee or with workers. It's like, what does a good day look like? What does success look like? When I've got the right tools, when, the timing of delivery of materials, because sometimes when things are delayed, that creates congestion, and then that can lead to mistakes. So these are just really good questions to jump into to help understand the nature of the problem. So just coming up to the end here, and just rounding it out with, on the one side, we've got some traditional thinking that I've kind of talked about, that, there's belief that it's a single cause, that, workers just have to pay attention and always make eye contact, and that generally, if they were just paying more attention, there won't be problems. But we want to kind of transfer the conversation over to kind of a more current, science-based new way of thinking, doing safety in a different way. It's not the absence of incidents, it's the presence of capacity, and knowing that, workers aren't just distracted and complacent, but there's a lot of things going on work sites, and the workers are resources and can really help in developing solutions. So effective prevention, this is summarized in the bulletin. And the main takeaway here is to develop solutions starting at the top, to try to eliminate the interaction where possible. Beginning, with in the blue, in the green, and the yellow, the elimination, the substitution, and the engineering controls. And why? Because they offer the best protection for the worker. And as you go down, there's more and more reliance on the worker to have to do the right thing. Even with RFIDs, which are really good, the radio frequency identification tags that go inside helmets, they're starting to take traction. They can go inside vests as well, but it does rely on wearing the hard hat and wearing the vest. And so you can see where there are some loopholes that, again, they rely on the person to do the right thing all the time, and that doesn't always go according to plan. So just in summary, a plan for continuous improvement, keep the system in focus. Work is always performed in context. We know that to some degree, each of these factors play a role, even if it's just one or two factors in each category. I know I've listed off many factors, and that is offered as an example, but if you go through the list and you're discovering one or two things, you'll get to very full holistic picture of the incidents that you might be experiencing. And then you want to, I've talked about the hierarchy, and you want to create what I call a pull rather than a push. A pull is, look at what we're doing. We've been able to get traction and make a win and get workers engaged and bought in, and let's do more of that. Let's share about it. Like if you've got sites up north, maybe you're going to go to the interior, and let's create some momentum. We've got more resources. I'm available as a resource to help build the momentum, and we want to do it more proactively rather than reactively, especially due to the nature of the hazard. And then at the center, I've got this diagram going round and round, because we have to go continuously. It's not one and done. We might tackle one risk, but then we need to do it again. So just offer that as an ongoing cycle of improvement for both engagement, identification, and then ultimately implementing effective controls and creating that momentum and doing it all over again. So with that, I'm going to call it a wrap, and definitely take any questions. And while you're maybe want to throw a question or two into the chat, I do want to just highlight some of the resources that Tammy's already provided. And there's a few other additional resources. There's been WorkSafe BC Magazine's safety spotlights, and one very recent about some good work going on at Site C. The bulletins, I've talked about that. But Road Safety at Work, if you go onto their website and just Google Struck-Bys, it was a webinar that I did I think about 1.5 years ago, and it's really highlighting a lot of what we've talked about today. And then there's a few more videos. This is a video of CGE Risk Heineken with Saskia. She's the director of health and safety for Heineken, and they were dealing with Struck-Bys, and they have an excellent video on how they operationalized their bow ties as well. And then here's an additional reading list. Those are my top picks. But if we want to get started on kind of moving the needle towards that new way of thinking, those are kind of my two strongest recommendations for you. And over to Bill, or Tammy. I see it's 12:03. I know people probably have to run off. If there's any burning questions.
Thanks a lot, Heather. That was great. Provided a lot of good information to everybody. And if anybody has any additional questions for Heather or needs to look at some of the resources that we presented today, we will make sure that we can get that to you. Okay, sounds like there's a good comment from Mike DeFore there that about WCB and HOP in the same place so soon. So good for you, Heather. It's good recognition there. So thanks a lot, everybody. It's lunchtime, and possibly I'll see some of you at 1 o'clock when we talk about the proposed regulations. Thanks,
Yeah.
Heather. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
you bet. And Mike, do you want me to just jump in for a little bit? We've been doing HOP, like it's just by a different name. I've been classically trained in it for at least 2 decades, and we call it in our world, and I explained it, HF. But the Todd Conklins, Andrea Bakers, and a number of other ones in that space. Jeffrey Lith, if you know HOP, you probably know some of these names. They've coined it human and organizational performance to draw in all those aspects. And we've been doing it kind of reactively for at least a decade and a half, looking at it through the lens of investigations. And if you're keen, I'd like to reach out to you because we want to try to move HOP into a proactive space, working with a number of employers. On May 30th, if that's of it's probably last minute for you now, but we're having a conversation about that very thing and would welcome your input. So if you can reach out to me at my email, that would be wonderful, and we can be in touch.
Thanks, Heather. Will do.
Okay, terrific.
Appreciate it. I'm interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay, cool. And we'd love to, we're just having these conversations with Todd McDonald. My colleague and I, Jenny, we spoke on the topic of work as imagined versus work as done last week 4 times. And they are seeing and hearing the interest from prevention officers, from employers. It's gaining a lot of momentum, and it's got a lot of traction in Alberta. And I can think of at least a dozen companies in BC, and I want to even introduce Bill to it as well, to start moving the conversation in a really positive direction.
Great, Heather. We'll have to make sure we do that soon.
Sounds good.
Okay, I think
Okay.
we'll go from there. And thank you very much for your time, Heather. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and I'll be in touch next week just to circle back for touch point and provide you any other resource, and we can continue the conversation on how better, or if there's anything else to help serve your group, and struck bys or other topics.
Yeah, no, that'll be
Alrighty.
great. There's some things that have come up that definitely we're gonna be looking at with you.
Perfect. Look forward to it.
Okay.
Have a great rest of the day. Thanks again
You
for the
too.
opportunity.
Okay.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.